Chapter 1. You're sitting there thinking about how often you've explained yourself, how many times you've tried to be clear, reasonable, patient, how many times you've replayed conversations in your head, wondering if you said too much or not enough, if you should have pushed harder or backed off sooner. And there's this quiet irritation underneath it all, because you can feel that you're doing something, but you're not getting what you want. Not consistently, not cleanly, and definitely not in a way that feels solid or repeatable. You don't say it out loud, but you notice patterns. You notice how some men don't talk much at all, yet things seem to move in their favor. You notice how they aren't rushing, aren't explaining, aren't negotiating every emotional detail. They're not perfect, they're not magical, but somehow effort flows toward them. Cooperation feels easier around them. And that contrast messes with your head because it forces you to confront something uncomfortable about how attraction and influence actually work. Most men start from the assumption that getting what you want from a woman is about convincing her. You say the right things, show consistency, prove intent, demonstrate loyalty, and eventually it should add up. That logic feels fair. It feels adult. It feels like how things should work. But real life doesn't reward fairness. It rewards leverage. And leverage isn't loud. It's quiet, structural, and usually invisible to the person trying to manufacture it through words. When you talk too much, you give away information before it's earned. You reveal desire before it's reciprocated. You signal priority before it's justified. And none of that makes you a bad person. It just puts you in a position where the other person doesn't have to move. They can stay undecided, comfortable, non-committal. You end up doing emotional labor while they get to observe without consequence. And the more you try to close that gap verbally, the wider it becomes. Here's the part most men miss because nobody tells them. Women don't respond to what you want. They respond to what you do when you don't get it. That's where the truth is. Not in your words, not in your intentions, in your response to resistance, in how you move when things aren't going your way, in whether your life continues forward without needing her approval to validate it. Think about how often you've tried to secure an outcome by clarifying expectations. You explain what you're looking for. You say what you want. You hope that honesty alone will create alignment. Sometimes it works briefly, but often it just leads to compliance without enthusiasm. And compliance without enthusiasm never lasts. It turns into resentment, withdrawal, or quiet defiance. Not because she's wrong, but because attraction doesn't thrive under obligation. Men who get what they want most of the time don't chase alignment. They select for it. They don't convince. They observe. They don't pressure. They create conditions. Their lives are already moving somewhere, and women either plug into that movement or they don't. There's no debate about it. No prolonged negotiation. No emotional bargaining. That clarity is what creates ease, because it removes uncertainty from the environment. You can feel the difference when you're around someone like that. They're not cold, they're not detached, they're present, but they're not waiting, they're not paused, hoping you'll decide. They've already decided where they're going, and they're inviting, not pleading. That energy does something to people. It makes effort feel voluntary instead of extracted. And voluntary effort is the only kind that feels good on both sides. Most men sabotage this without realizing it by putting the woman at the center of their decision-making too early. Schedules shift, priorities adjust, plans rearrange, not because she asked, but because he wants to be accommodating. And again, that doesn't make him weak. It just communicates that his life is flexible around her uncertainty. Over time, that flexibility becomes expectation, and expectation kills desire faster than conflict ever could. There's one situation that captures this perfectly. A man meets a woman and enjoys her company. He doesn't rush intimacy. He doesn't rush commitment. He continues showing up to his routines, his work, his friendships. When plans don't line up, he doesn't scramble to fix it. He simply keeps moving. She notices that access to him has structure, not rules spoken out loud, but rhythms that don't bend easily. And without him asking for anything, she starts offering more. More time, more effort, more consistency. Not because he demanded it, but because she wanted to secure her place in a life that clearly had direction. That's the difference between asking for what you want and positioning yourself so that what you want becomes the natural response. One feels needy. The other feels inevitable. And inevitability is powerful because it removes the struggle. Nobody feels manipulated when they're choosing to move toward something that already feels solid. A lot of men hear this and immediately think it's about pretending not to care. It's not. Indifference isn't attractive. Direction is. Caring deeply while remaining anchored to your own path is what creates gravity. You're not withholding affection. You're not playing games. You're simply not abandoning yourself to secure someone else's interest. That distinction matters more than any tactic or line you could ever memorize. Pay attention to how often you talk about what you want versus how often your behavior already reflects it. If you say you value respect but tolerate disrespect, your words mean nothing. If you say you want consistency but reward inconsistency with attention, you're teaching the wrong lesson. People respond to consequences, not explanations. And consequences don't require anger. They require consistency. This is uncomfortable because it forces you to give up control. You can't force someone to want what you want. You can only decide what you accept and what you walk away from. Walking away doesn't mean slamming doors. It means not lingering where your standards aren't met. That quiet withdrawal of availability is far more effective than any confrontation because it shifts the power dynamic without turning it into a fight. If you're listening to this and recognizing yourself in it, take a second and like the video. Not as a signal of agreement, but as a marker that you're ready to stop repeating patterns that haven't worked. You don't need to change who you are. You need to change where you place your energy. Chapter 2. There's a moment most men remember, even if they don't name it. A point where effort stopped being met with enthusiasm and started being met with tolerance. Where replies slowed down, plans got softer, affection became conditional. And instead of stepping back, most men lean in harder. They explain more. They offer more. They try to re-earn something that was never supposed to be earned in the first place. That's usually when leverage disappears completely, not because she took it, but because he handed it over trying to keep the peace. Leverage isn't dominance. It isn't control. It's the natural result of being willing to lose what you're engaging with. That sentence makes people uncomfortable because it sounds harsh, but it's not about threat. It's about orientation. If you're oriented toward preserving something at any cost, you've already lost your ability to influence it. The other person can feel that. They don't even need to articulate it. The dynamic shifts internally long before it shows externally. Most men think leverage comes from being desired. It doesn't. Desire fluctuates. Leverage comes from being grounded, from having a life that continues regardless of someone else's indecision. When your happiness, momentum, and identity are not tethered to her response, you stop negotiating emotionally. And when you stop negotiating, things either align quickly or fall apart cleanly. Both outcomes are wins, even though one feels better emotionally in the moment. You've probably noticed how often men tolerate behavior early on that they would never accept later. Late replies, flaky plans, mixed signals, small dismissals disguised as jokes. They tell themselves it's temporary, that it'll change once things are established. But establishment doesn't correct misalignment. It amplifies it. Whatever you accept early becomes the baseline, and baselines are hard to renegotiate without friction. Here's where men confuse patience with strategy. Patience is waiting without resentment. Strategy is observing without attachment. Most men wait while emotionally invested, which turns patience into quiet desperation. You're watching, hoping, reading between lines. That internal tension leaks out no matter how calm you think you look. People feel it. And when they feel it, they pull away instinctively, not maliciously, but because pressure repels. Men who consistently get what they want don't rush to define things. They let patterns define themselves. They don't correct every misstep. They note it. They don't threaten consequences. They live them. If someone becomes inconsistent, they don't chase consistency. They reduce access, not as punishment, as alignment. They simply stop over-investing where reciprocity drops. And that adjustment alone often changes everything because it introduces a reality check without words. There's a quiet confidence in letting silence do the work. Silence doesn't mean ignoring. It means not filling space with anxiety. When you don't rush to soothe uncertainty, you allow the other person to feel it instead. That's when effort becomes voluntary again. Either she steps forward to close the gap, or she doesn't. In both cases, the truth reveals itself without you forcing it out. Men often sabotage this phase by becoming reactive. A shift in tone triggers confrontation. A delay triggers suspicion. A change in routine triggers insecurity. And once reactions become predictable, leverage evaporates. Predictability isn't stability when it's driven by fear. It becomes a map for how to manage you, not consciously, emotionally. People learn how much effort is required to keep you engaged. When that effort is low, value perception drops accordingly. Think about how different it feels when someone has options versus when they're clearly fixated. Options create calm. Fixation creates urgency. Calm attracts. Urgency pressures. This isn't about having other women lined up. It's about having other sources of fulfillment that make any one person a complement, not a necessity. When your emotional ecosystem is diversified, no single connection holds disproportionate power over your mood or self-worth. There's a story that captures this without drama. A man dates a woman he likes. She's engaging but inconsistent. Instead of calling it out, he maintains warmth while subtly shifting his focus back to his routine. He stops rearranging his schedule. He doesn't double text. He doesn't initiate every interaction. Over time, she either adjusts and increases her effort, sensing the change, or she fades, revealing that her interest was conditional all along. Either way, he never loses himself trying to manage her uncertainty. That's leverage in action, quiet, clean, self-respecting. Most men never experience this because they confuse effort with value. They believe that showing how much they care will be appreciated. Sometimes it is. Often it isn't, especially early on. Early stages aren't about proving depth, they're about establishing rhythm. When rhythm is off, more effort doesn't fix it, it distorts it. Depth comes later, when consistency is mutual and attraction is stable. Another trap men fall into is thinking boundaries require explanation. They don't. Explaining boundaries invites negotiation. Enforcing them through behavior ends debate. You don't need to announce that you won't tolerate inconsistency. You simply stop rewarding it. You don't need to say you value respect. You respond differently when it's absent. That's how leverage is maintained without confrontation or control. This is where getting what you want stops being about women entirely and starts being about how you structure your life. If your life has momentum, people feel it. If it has purpose, they respect it. If it has direction, they either align with it or step aside. You don't have to ask for cooperation when your path is clear. People cooperate because it makes sense to. As this sinks in, notice how different this feels from manipulation. There's no deception here, no pretending, no withholding to gain advantage. It's honesty without oversharing, presence without neediness, standards without ultimatums. And those qualities change how people respond to you across the board, not just romantically. If this chapter is hitting uncomfortably close to home, that's a good sign. It means you're seeing where effort was replacing alignment, where words were replacing structure. Take a moment and share this with someone who keeps trying to talk their way into being chosen. In the next chapter, we'll look at the internal shifts men have to make to stop repeating these dynamics and how to move from hoping for outcomes to creating conditions where the outcomes you want become likely. not rare. Chapter 3. There's a quieter layer beneath all of this that most men never examine because it doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up as a background hum, a low-level tension you carry into interactions without realizing it. The feeling that you're trying to be chosen instead of deciding. That hum shapes your tone, your timing, your patience, your tolerance. And until you address it, no external change will stick for long. What happens internally before a man ever asks for anything is far more important than the ask itself. If your internal posture is, "I hope this works, I hope she chooses me, I hope I don't mess this up," then everything you do carries that frequency. Even confident words sound hollow when they're powered by fear of loss. People don't hear the words, they feel the posture behind them. And posture is revealed most clearly when you don't get immediate compliance. Think about how often you've agreed to things you didn't want because you didn't want to rock the boat. How often you stayed quiet when something bothered you because you didn't want to risk tension. That silence isn't neutral. It trains you to ignore yourself. And once you ignore yourself long enough, others will too. Not out of malice, out of pattern recognition. You've shown them that your discomfort is manageable, that you'll absorb it quietly. Men who get what they want most of the time have a different relationship with discomfort. They don't rush to eliminate it. They allow it to exist without panicking. If something feels off, they sit with that feeling instead of explaining it away. They don't immediately seek reassurance. They let the moment breathe. That pause is powerful because it creates space for truth to surface, either in the other person's behavior or in their own realization that something isn't aligned. Most men rush clarity because uncertainty feels unbearable, but uncertainty is only unbearable when you're emotionally dependent on the outcome. When you've built a life that feels full without external validation, uncertainty becomes tolerable. Even interesting, it becomes information instead of threat. And when uncertainty stops feeling like danger, you stop trying to control it through words or concessions. There's a subtle difference between wanting something and needing it. Wanting is directional, needing is destabilizing. When you want something, you move toward it. When you need something, you cling. And clinging kills attraction because it shifts the dynamic from choice to obligation. Nobody wants to feel responsible for someone else's emotional stability. That weight pushes people away even when they care. This is why men who appear effortless often aren't doing less. They're carrying less internal pressure. They're not trying to extract certainty from every interaction. They're not measuring every response for reassurance. They're present, but they're not leaning. That non-leaning presence creates space for the other person to step forward. And if they don't, it's noted without drama. You've probably seen this play out without naming it. A man is calm, engaged, but not over-invested. He doesn't chase responses. He doesn't escalate emotionally when things slow down. He keeps moving forward with his life. And somehow, people start leaning toward him. They initiate, they check in, they try to secure his attention, not because he's withholding, but because his attention feels earned, not guaranteed. The internal shift required to get here isn't easy. It means giving up fantasies about being understood without being demonstrated. It means letting go of the idea that if you just explain yourself better, things will align. Explanation is often a substitute for acceptance of reality as it is, not as you wish it were. And acceptance is where power quietly returns to you. There's one moment most men recognize when they look back honestly. A moment where they knew something was off but chose to ignore it because the connection felt good. They told themselves they were being patient, open-minded, flexible. But what they were really doing was bargaining with themselves, hoping that future behavior would justify present discomfort. That bargain almost never pays out. It just delays the inevitable and increases the emotional cost. Men who stop repeating that pattern don't become rigid or closed off. They become precise. They don't require perfection. They require alignment. They allow room for mistakes, but not for chronic misfit. And that distinction changes everything. You stop asking, how do I get what I want from her? And start asking, does this situation naturally move toward what I want without force? If the answer is no, you don't argue with it. You adjust your position. This is where standards stop being theoretical. Standards aren't declarations, they're filters. They're revealed by what you continue engaging with and what you quietly step away from. You don't need to announce them, you live them. And living them means being okay with fewer connections in exchange for better ones. Quantity decreases, quality increases, and the irony is that once you're no longer chasing volume, opportunities tend to expand anyway. Another internal trap men fall into is over-identifying with effort. They think effort equals worth. So if they try harder, they expect better results. But effort without leverage feels invisible. It blends into the background. It becomes expected. And when effort becomes expected, appreciation disappears. This isn't cruelty. It's human nature. Value is perceived where there's selectivity, not where there's endless availability. When you stop overgiving, you don't become selfish. You become intentional. You give where it's reciprocated. You invest where there's momentum, and you don't punish yourself for walking away from situations that don't meet you halfway. That shift alone changes how people respond to you because you're no longer broadcasting, "I'll take whatever you give." You're communicating, "I respond to alignment, not potential." There's a story that captures this internal shift without grand gestures. A man realizes he's always the one initiating, adjusting, explaining. Instead of confronting, he simply stops overfunctioning. He matches effort. He maintains warmth, but doesn't chase. Over time, the dynamic reveals itself clearly. Either the other person steps up, sensing the change, or they fade, confirming that the connection was sustained by his effort alone. In both outcomes, he gains clarity without losing dignity, and that clarity becomes the foundation for how he moves forward in future connections. The hardest part of this transition is sitting in the gap between old habits and new behavior. You'll feel the urge to explain, to fix, to reach out. That urge is just your nervous system adjusting to a new posture. It passes if you don't act on it. And once it passes, you realize you're calmer, more centered, less reactive. That calm becomes your baseline. And from that baseline, getting what you want stops being a struggle and starts being a byproduct of alignment. If this chapter is helping you see how internal posture shapes external outcomes, take a second and like the video, not because it's comfortable, but because it's honest. In the next chapter, we'll talk about how to communicate desire, boundaries, and intent without killing attraction, and how the right kind of clarity creates cooperation instead of resistance. Chapter 4. There's a point where men start thinking communication is the missing piece, like if they could just find the right wording, the right tone, the right timing, things would finally click. And that belief keeps them trapped, because communication only works when there's already alignment underneath it. Words don't create alignment. They reveal whether it exists. When men don't understand that, they keep trying to talk their way out of situations that are fundamentally misaligned, and every attempt makes them feel smaller without them knowing why. You've probably been in conversations where you explained yourself clearly, calmly, respectfully, and still walked away feeling unheard. Not misunderstood, but unheard. That distinction matters. Misunderstanding can be corrected. Disinterest cannot. And most men mislabel disinterest as confusion because it feels kinder to believe the issue is clarity rather than desire. But desire doesn't need clarification. It expresses itself through behavior without being asked. This is where men go wrong when they try to get what they want. They think asking directly is mature, transparent, healthy, and sometimes it is when timing and alignment are right. But most of the time, asking is premature. It exposes want before leverage exists. It turns preference into pressure. And pressure triggers resistance, even in people who like you. Not because they're manipulative, but because nobody likes feeling managed emotionally. The men who get what they want most of the time understand something subtle. They let their standards speak before their mouth does. They don't announce expectations early. They demonstrate them through how they live, what they tolerate, and how they respond to misalignment. When they finally do communicate, it's not a negotiation, it's a clarification. And clarification only works when the other person already wants to meet you there. Think about how different it feels when someone states a need versus when they ask permission for it. One feels grounded, the other feels tentative. You can hear the difference immediately, and people respond differently to each. Grounded statements invite alignment or honest refusal. Tentative asks invite delay, ambiguity, or half compliance. That's not because women are cruel. It's because uncertainty creates space to avoid commitment without confrontation. Most men don't realize they're communicating from a place of uncertainty because they have never been taught how to anchor internally first. They rush to express what they want before they have decided what they'll do if they don't get it. That's the critical mistake. Communication without consequence is just noise, not punishment. Consequence, the natural outcome of behavior continuing or stopping based on alignment. This doesn't mean being rigid or inflexible. It means being honest with yourself. If you say you want consistency, what happens when you don't receive it? Do you explain why it matters to you, hoping she'll change? Or do you adjust your investment to match reality? Most men choose the first path because it feels proactive, but the second path is the one that actually communicates value without eroding attraction. There's a quiet confidence in not over-explaining your standards. When you explain too much, you invite debate. Debate turns preferences into arguments. Arguments turn attraction into obligation. Obligation kills enthusiasm. You don't want someone complying because they feel cornered by logic. You want them choosing because it feels natural to do so. And that only happens when your life already reflects what you say you value. You've seen this play out in small ways. A man says he values respect but laughs off disrespect. A man says he wants effort but keeps initiating when effort drops. A man says he wants honesty but avoids uncomfortable truths. Over time, his words lose meaning. Not because they're wrong, but because they're unsupported by action. People don't follow words, they follow patterns. Men who communicate effectively don't raise their voice or sharpen their language, they sharpen their consistency. When something matters, they don't threaten consequences. They allow them to occur. That might look like spending less time with someone who flakes. It might look like not rewarding dismissive behavior with extra affection. It might look like walking away quietly from a dynamic that requires constant justification. None of that needs to be announced. It's felt immediately. There's a moment when a woman realizes she can't test boundaries indefinitely, not because the man said anything, but because the environment changed. Access decreased, energy shifted, availability became conditional on alignment instead of persistence. That moment is when real choice appears. She can step up or step out. Either response provides clarity, and clarity is always preferable to prolonged ambiguity, even if it hurts initially. Most men sabotage this moment by intervening too early. They feel the shift and rush to explain it. They say, "I've been feeling like you've been distant," or "I need more effort," or "I don't feel prioritized." Those statements aren't wrong, they're just often mistimed. When spoken before leverage exists, they sound like complaints rather than boundaries. And complaints rarely inspire desire. They inspire defensiveness or guilt at best. Timing matters more than content. Communication works when the other person already senses the change and is motivated to understand it. When she's already feeling the loss of access or energy. When the environment is shifted enough to make the conversation relevant. Then, words land. Before that, they float away or get twisted into something you didn't intend. This is why men who get what they want don't rush conversations. They let behavior speak first. If someone's interest is strong, communication feels easy and affirming. If it's weak, communication feels strained no matter how well you phrase it. That contrast tells you more than any answer you could extract. And when you listen to that information instead of arguing with it, you save yourself months of confusion. There's one story that captures this without dramatics. A man notices that the woman he's seeing starts pulling back. Instead of confronting immediately, he adjusts his behavior. He stops initiating as much. He stays warm but doesn't chase. After some time, she brings it up herself, asking if something is wrong. That's when he communicates clearly, not emotionally, not defensively, just honestly. Because now the conversation is grounded in shared awareness, not one-sided anxiety. Whether she steps up or not, the man never loses his footing. He doesn't beg. He doesn't argue. He simply states what aligns with him and lets reality respond. This approach feels counterintuitive because it requires patience and restraint. It asks you to tolerate not being immediately understood. But restraint is attractive because it signals self-trust. You're not scrambling to be validated. You're not afraid of silence. You're not trying to control the outcome through words. That calm confidence changes how people listen to you when you do speak. Another thing men misunderstand is that clarity doesn't mean rigidity. You can be clear and flexible at the same time. Flexible about details, inflexible about values. Most men do the opposite. They're flexible about values and rigid about details. They fixate on specific behaviors instead of underlying alignment. That keeps them stuck in surface-level negotiations instead of addressing the real issue, which is whether the connection actually works for them. As you internalize this, you'll notice that your conversations change naturally. You speak less but with more weight. You ask fewer questions, but they matter more. You stop trying to convince and start observing responses. And people respond differently to that presence because it feels grounded, not demanding. It feels like leadership, not persuasion. If this chapter is making you rethink how and when you communicate desire, standards, and expectations, pause and share this with someone who keeps explaining themselves into frustration. Communication isn't about saying more. It's about saying the right thing at the right time from a place of internal alignment. In the final chapter, we'll tie everything together and talk about how men create lives where getting what they want becomes common, not rare, because their environment, standards, and self-respect are already doing most of the work for them. Chapter 5. At some point, you stop thinking about women as the variable you're trying to solve, and you start realizing that the real work has always been structural. Not emotional, not verbal, structural. The way your days are built, the way your time is allocated, the way your attention is guarded, the way your standards are enforced quietly instead of argued loudly. When those things lock into place, getting what you want stops feeling like strategy and starts feeling like gravity. Men who get what they want 99% of the time aren't running plays. They're running lives that don't require constant negotiation. Their schedules don't orbit uncertainty. Their energy isn't fragmented across maybes. They know what they're doing tomorrow whether anyone joins them or not. And that certainty does something powerful to the people around them. It removes confusion. It removes the need for testing. It replaces anxiety with clarity. People either align with it or remove themselves, and both outcomes feel clean. Most men never experience this because they build their lives with too much emotional slack, too much room for indecision, too much tolerance for ambiguity where clarity should exist. They say they want peace, but they structure chaos. They say they want respect, but they reward disrespect with access. They say they want effort, but they give attention freely without requiring reciprocity. Over time, that mismatch creates frustration, not because women are withholding, but because the environment doesn't require them to contribute meaningfully. When your life is solid, people feel it immediately. You don't need to announce boundaries because they're implied by how you move. You don't need to demand effort because effort becomes the cost of entry. You don't need to ask for respect because disrespect simply doesn't get rewarded with continued access. None of this is harsh. It's clean. It removes drama because it removes confusion. And confusion is where most relationship problems are born. Think about how often you've stayed in situations hoping someone would rise to meet you, hoping they'd eventually see your value, hoping consistency would come if you just stayed patient. That hope feels noble, but it keeps you stuck. Men who get what they want don't wait for people to change. They select people who already fit the direction they're moving in. They don't rescue potential. They align with momentum. There's a noticeable shift that happens when you stop trying to be chosen and start choosing. Your questions change. You stop asking, "How do I make her want this?" and start asking, "Does this situation already support what I want?" If the answer is no, you don't argue with it. You adjust your position. That adjustment isn't reactive, it's intentional. And intentional movement is what restores leverage without you ever needing to talk about it. This is where men confuse confidence with performance. Confidence isn't showing dominance or detachment. It's comfort in your own direction. You're not posturing. You're not pretending. You're simply not available for dynamics that don't serve you. That comfort makes you predictable in the best way. People know where you stand because you stand somewhere, not everywhere, not wherever you're needed, somewhere specific. You'll notice that when you live this way, conversations become easier. You're not negotiating attraction. You're not managing emotions. You're not over-explaining your intentions. You're inviting alignment. And invitations are powerful because they allow choice without pressure. When someone chooses you freely, effort feels genuine. When they don't, you don't need closure speeches. Reality already gave you the answer. There's one final story that ties this together. A man restructures his life around what actually matters to him. His work has rhythm. His health has discipline. His social life has intention. When he dates, he doesn't rush intimacy or commitment. He observes. He matches effort. He enjoys connection without clinging to it. Over time, women either step into his world willingly or drift away. He doesn't chase either outcome. And because of that, the women who stay are invested. Not because he demanded it, but because being part of his life feels valuable. That's not luck. That's structure doing the work for him. Most men want shortcuts. They want lines, techniques, scripts. But the truth is quieter and less marketable. Getting what you want from women most of the time isn't about saying the right thing. It's about living in a way that doesn't require convincing. When your life is full, your standards are clear, and your energy is grounded, cooperation becomes the path of least resistance. People want to be part of something that's already moving forward. This doesn't mean you'll always get the exact outcome you want with every woman. 99% doesn't mean perfection. It means clarity. It means you stop wasting time in dynamics that drain you. It means the outcomes you do get feel mutual instead of extracted. It means fewer conversations, fewer misunderstandings, fewer emotional loops. And that efficiency isn't cold. It's respectful to both sides. As you sit with this, don't turn it into a checklist. Don't try to optimize it immediately. Let it settle. Notice where your life lacks structure. Notice where you've been overgiving to compensate for misalignment. Notice where you've been explaining instead of enforcing. Those observations will guide you better than any tactic ever could. If this series helped you see why getting what you want is less about persuasion and more about positioning, like the video. Not to boost numbers, but to mark the moment you decided to stop negotiating your worth. Share it with someone who keeps trying to talk their way into alignment. And remember this as you move forward. When your life has direction, standards, and momentum, you don't have to ask for much. Most of what you want shows up on its own.